how often is it that you get accused of not being natural these days? It's got to be all the time.
Yeah, daily basis.
Yeah.
Some usually young man is in my DMs, either just sending me the needles
Yeah, yeah.
or just sometimes not, this is not every day, but at least a couple times a week, I'll get like a novel saying how out of integrity I am and how I should be ashamed of myself. And
Right, right, right.
I'm giving false hopes for young men. And, I think a lot of angry young men primarily.
Yeah, it's one of the things. So I have a long video on my channel. It's like 40 minutes long, and it was kind of discussed within the, evidence-based community a little bit. We had a few podcasts about it. And it was basically on the discussion of genetics. And sometimes you'll see somebody who's just like a total freak, and I see the instant accusations of steroids. And obviously I have no idea who is that is not on steroids. I mean, you can generally know who is got to be on steroids, right? If you're looking at Ronnie Coleman, of course, but you really can't see somebody say, "Oh, I know he's not on steroids," because there's plenty of small people who are on steroids, right?
Sure.
And when you look at the influence of genetics compared to steroids, obviously the difference is you can't dose genetics, right? You can obviously just keep increasing dose of anabolics and whatnot. But
Absolutely.
I think people often really underestimate how much of a factor or genetics can be, but just the variation among people, right? Like we live in a world where there are men who are 7 feet tall and who are 4'8", right? And
Right.
there's percentiles, and you're looking at now a sport that has grown to a very widespread audience, and so you're just going to have a higher and higher caliber of people come out of the woodwork and who are competing and whatnot. So to me, I mean,
Hmm.
unless somebody's really, really obvious, I usually try to withhold any sort of like judgment or accusations because you really don't know. And there's such a wide variety there.
Yeah, dude, that's beautifully said. And I think, the further I get into this, the more I open up to the idea that I just think genetics just plays such a freaking huge role. And it can be a gut punch for any, I think, bodybuilder, especially natural bodybuilder. Like, what I would love to be able to say, like, this is sheer hard work and determination, and I put in all the time, which is true.
I'm waiting for you to tell me that your only genetic gift is that you outwork everybody in the room. That's the line I just need. I was waiting for it, but no, not bad.
Self-made. That's another one in business. Just being, everyone says they're self-made. No, dude, like genetics is such a huge thing. Like I couldn't make an NBA team, obviously, even if I was that tall. I don't have the coordination for it. But yeah, I think it's an alignment. Like you said, a lot of more eyeballs are on the sport. Social media is a whole other thing. We can see every different shape, size, type of physique. I was inspired to get into natural bodybuilding pretty much through people I've met through social media and on the internet. Um, it's an alignment of a lot of factors. Um, that the talent has to meet the hard work. You have to be intelligent with it as well. Um, yeah, but like you said, I think yeah, it's both factors.
Right. And well, that's what's always hard about it is because I do understand, like I was because obviously I'm making a little bit of a dig at some of the bodybuilders who say things like that. And it's
Sure,
tough because, I mentioned I got started when I was 14 and I didn't just casually lift. I mean, I got really heavily into it almost right away and I was very obsessed with it. And if I had an amazing response, I hate to say it, I probably would have been that person who said, "Oh, I'm bigger than everybody because of my hard work," because that was a
sure.
component. It was there.
Yeah,
And I would have been like, "Well, you're not working as hard as I am. That's the reason." And as you said, it's got to be both, like especially at the top level, right? Like everybody who would even have the potential to compete in the NPC naturally, of course, has to have the genetics, but also, that's not just going to casually happen after 5 to 7 years. Like that takes
no.
really dedicated effort.
I think you see the signs relatively early, at least just anecdotally. I I was a soccer player through high school, but I was always like poked at on the soccer team. It's like Brian's the jack kid with abs. Like
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was that kid, even though I had never touched a weight yet, and all I did
Oh,
was
interesting.
cardio-based sports.
Yeah.
And then within the first year or two of weight training, I gained weight pretty quickly. So um, I knew I definitely knew and was getting the signs just from those comments from friends and stuff. Like my genetic propensity to put on muscle faster was definitely something I noticed early.
Yeah, and then of course, and this is where you really see both factors, magnify because if you look at in the case of the NBA players, right, they do well. Well, if you are doing well at something, you get the positive feedback and then you do more of it. So it just
Sure.
necessarily becomes the case that the people who are the most genetically gifted end up also working the hardest because if you don't have an aptitude for something, it would really be kind of illogical to just keep putting your whole life into it and just spinning your
Sure.
wheels just to be, in this case, an average basketball player, right? So both end up kind
Absolutely.
of gravitating towards each other.
Absolutely, I agree. And that's true for myself as well. I think that positive reinforcement enriched my desire to go deeper in on the gym and really lean into it.
Yeah. Let me ask you if you agree with this. So, what I would say is if I were to look at, say, you at 7 years into lifting or 5 years, whatever it is, and I'm sure at that point you were already pretty freaky. And I've seen other examples where somebody said, like, wow, I'm really impressed by that person. And I would actually say that in that example, that individual I am not impressed with. And I'll give an analogy as to why. So imagine you and your buddy, you're both really into cars, and for a year, you both learn everything you can about cars and you learn about racing. And then you get to the track and they get into a Porsche 911 Turbo S and you got a 1994 Camry and you both hit the pedal and they just mop the floor with you, right? Would you
Yeah,
say you're impressed with that person or that car? Right? You're not really impressed with the person, but you are
sure.
impressed with that performance. Now, if that person then goes on and learns to be a professional racer. So in the case of you, at this point now, I'd say what you have done has become very impressive because it's now, 15 plus years into it. And especially, I mean, then you go into the NPC and all of that. But I do find that some people, especially on social media, they're almost like their mouth is watering over some of these people who they're really gifted, but they haven't done the impressive thing yet. And by example, Brad Loomis from 3DMJ.
Yeah.
So Brad Loomis, we've talked numerous times, great guy. He just competed at 52 years old, and I think he's 52. Got on
Hmm.
stage after, geez, I don't know, 30 years of lifting, and he competed at 158, and you guys are basically identical height. I'm
Yeah.
super impressed with him to have brought his best package
Dude.
at 52 years old. And like that's awesome. Even though by his own admission, maybe not the best genetics for the sport, wide waist and everything. So, and again, I'm obviously not taking away from you specifically because now you've gotten to that point. But
Sure.
anybody who's just naturally impressive within 5 years or they've done a craft for a few years, to me, it's like if I'm looking at the person, I look a lot at like their psychology, their dedication to something, and how much they have been able to put into it.
Yeah, no. Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, and I'm not one to judge, but I think, as you get older or I guess pay more attention to this sport specifically, you start to vet who you draw inspiration from and you recalibrate what you find like as impressive.
Yeah.
And like you said, I'm not impressed by, the girl who's got favorable fat distribution on social media, who's talking about going through a body recomposition. And oh my God, like she does a before and after and she gained 20 or 30 pounds and it's all in like her glutes and
Yeah,
legs.
right,
It's like, okay,
right. Yeah,
you can thank God and your parents for that.
yeah,
It's not this program that you're selling. I'm not so as much impressed with that. I'm impressed by last year when I was on stage and won my pro card in Boston. I competed against two dudes who were both 63 years old who looked freaking ridiculous. And one of their names has escaped me. One's name is Keith. Shout out to Keith, who owns a gym in Jersey, actually. Kent. Oh man, I'm being horrible with my names right now. I can share them after the podcast, but
yeah,
these dudes were freaking shredded. They were jacked and just broke my brain in like the sense of what's possible. And they've been
yeah.
doing it and loving it for 30 plus years.